hope no one else walks by, no cars drive by. It's Sunday, and everywhere I go, I'll sit down initially, it'll be quiet. And then everybody wants to just come strolling in, making all this ruckus. No, stop. I'm getting upset. I just want to record this video in peace. Alright, with that being said. If you can't already tell, I love superheroes. I love movies, comics, and all the media that comes with it. And in the past year, I've gotten back into reading. And with reading, I wanted to read more comics too. And when I heard that the Absolute Batman run was getting announced, I wanted to get it. And I made an effort to pick up every issue that's come out so far. I think it's really interesting, it's different, and it's a great jumping on point for new readers. And once I read the first issue of Absolute Batman, I knew I had to make something of it. Oftentimes when I consume a piece of media that I really enjoy, I feel this deep compulsion, or I feel compelled to make something of it, kind of as a show of appreciation and kind of get inside the mind of the creator or the designer as to what they were doing, what their process was. And if the media is something like a movie, a comic, or a TV show, there's usually a waiting period between the next episode or movie or issue. So in the meantime, I like to make something to kind of fill that space. I know I wanted to recreate the action sequence of Batman's first encounter with Black Mask's party animal gang. It's a great display of how this Batman works, how he navigates certain situations, and how he's different from past iterations. I also really enjoy when action sequences are tied in with music, like in Baby Driver, Guardians of the Galaxy, or in one of my personal favorites, Shrek 2. Initially, it didn't take me very long to find a song to fit my vision. I had recently heard the song Field Trip, and I thought it really fit the tone that I wanted to achieve, really gritty and grimy and intense. After I had my song, I went into storyboarding, which is a step I usually don't do because I have the vision of what I want to do inside my head. But this time around, I made sure to do it because I wanted each frame to sync up with a certain moment in the song. And I've done something similar to this in the past with my Star Wars animation, but I wanted to take it up a notch with translating the comic one-to-one. After the storyboarding was done, I got into my character design. I used this reference of Absolute Batman as a base for my character model, and I just sculpted within the frame, starting with simple shapes and refining it as I went. After the base sculpt was done, I went into retopology for the animation. Added and fitted the rig to the model, boom, we're done. I'll probably make a separate tutorial for how I sculpt and rig my figures in the near future. Leave a comment if that's something you want to see. But I will talk a bit about how I made the cape. If you read the comic, you'll learn that Absolute Batman's cape works a lot differently from how it does in other iterations. It's more like tendrils than anything else. At first, I was going to do this cape entirely 2D, but after starting, I knew that this would only slow down my process. So I decided to build in 3D and then rig the tendrils similar to how I rig arms. And once Batman was done, I went into doing the party animal gang member. The process was simple enough. Find a reference, model, and adjust the textures that I had already made for Batman. Now this stage was by far the most difficult part of the entire process. I knew that it was going to be a challenge to translate Nick Dragotta's style to 3D, but I definitely underestimated how much work it would take. When looking at Dragotta's work, we see that there are primarily two textures to try to replicate. The first one is more of a painterly style where you can see all the muscles and contours, but the second one is very high contrast with dark shadows and a sketchy transition from light to dark. What I did first was start looking online for some tutorials that would help me achieve this look, or at least get me started on the right foot. And after about a day and a half of research, I found this tutorial that I'll link in the description. It explains how to emulate a painterly brush stroke that adapts to light and movement. And after experimenting for a bit, adjusting the nodes to fit my needs, I was able to recreate the first texture the way I wanted. Here's a screenshot of my final node setup. As for the higher contrast texture, it took a lot more time and finesse, but I was able to get a good understanding of how the nodes were affecting the overall texture, and I realized that duplicating certain functions in specific orders allowed me to exaggerate how the colors transition from light to dark. And then I ended up with exactly what I wanted. And for the finer line work details, I drew that onto the sculpt and layered that over my initial node setup. This same tutorial also had a part to show how to get these hashed lines in the shading, so I thought it would be cool to add them as well. To get my outlines, it's a process of adding and changing the base settings of a solidify modifier and adding a black emission to get that look. Or I did a different method where I would use a layer weight and a mask node. And here are the final results of Batman and the party animal member. For all other members, I just changed the colors a bit, added and adjusted the clothing, and base sculpt. Once I finished both, I was pretty drained from spending so much time on texturing and modeling, so I took a bit of a break. And this break turned into a year, almost to the date. And in that time, I kind of moved on from the Batman project. I didn't have as much drive to do it. A lot of other ideas of stuff I wanted to do came to the forefront, and I worked on that. But in the back of my mind, I knew I still wanted to finish it. I just didn't rush anything. I didn't want to start the project if the timing didn't feel right. When it came time to revisit Absolute Batman, something was off. I re-listened to the field trip and see how it lined up in my storyboard, and it didn't fit my vision anymore. So I looked at some of my saved music. I had recently heard Voices by Phantogram and went through their album again to see if something stood out. When I replayed Howling at the Moon, I knew I had found the right one. Initially, I tried to retell the action sequence in the comic as accurately as possible, but I knew the more things I tried to include, the longer it was going to take to animate. I made sure not to include any dialogue, cut out specific characters like Barbara Gordon and Miss Wayne. Without any dialogue, this freed up my ability to drive the narrative and dictate the pace of events. I wanted things to start off slow, build the anticipation. There were mainly 3 peaks of the songs that I wanted to hit. First, when the drums kick off the action. The second is when you first see Batman appear in full glory, when the guitar gets reintroduced into the song, and at the end when Batman goes Super Saiyan, and the lyrics say, Howling at the Moon. After some trial and error, I was able to get my storyboard to a concrete place, leaving some blank spaces for me to film later. When I go into creating my backgrounds, I only make it as good as it needs to look for the frame. That way I can streamline the assets I need to fill the space. It's not always necessary to build an entire perfect 3D environment that I can walk around in, because most of these shots are only going to be seen for a few seconds at a time. I usually make my backgrounds as I go. Once one scene is over, I build for the next scene. First, I start with getting my characters and camera in place for the animation, and then build the background around them. And once those are in place, I try to match the storyboard as much as possible. For things like clouds and buildings, I drew some of them out in Sketchbook and imported them as PNGs into my scene. I either tried to match the comic one-to-one or took some creative liberties to match my style. For structures that characters interact with, like floors, stairs, light poles, boxes, I built those in Blender, and then I reused some of the existing textures from earlier with some slight modifications. For one of the assets, like the smoke, that was an entirely different challenge. I've done smoke sparingly in the past, but I knew I was going to need to step it up. After another session of looking on YouTube, I found this great tutorial that pretty much gives me exactly what I wanted in terms of the movement of the smoke, being able to change the size and shape and flow as I needed. I was able to keep the colors pretty simple, using the same outline feature to showcase different clumps a bit better, and then I layered that look over a couple different color gradients. Here's another screenshot of the note setup that I'd used. And there's a quick section right here where the smoke goes transparent, and that was all done in the node setup. I had a mixed color between the smoke base color and a transparent node, and then keyframed the ramp so I could slide it as needed. One thing I use a lot in this animation is what I'm going to call these live backgrounds. I don't know the official name for them, but in the comic there's a lot of shots where the background is a solid color mixed with these crazy hash action lines. To recreate them, I use a Voronoi texture, simplified it to 2 colors, stretched it in one direction, and then I keyframe the movement. Depending on the shot, I use this node to help me determine if I either wanted a linear format or a circular cone format for the background. For some of the shots where I use black silhouettes like these ones, these are still 3D models. I just turn off all the lights to get them to look that way. For the past couple of videos, I like to animate at a rate of 24 frames per second, and then animate on every 4 to 8 frames. I like this style. I like the choppy look that it gives my animation. I know it's not for everyone, but it's something that I really enjoy doing. Once I did all the base animation, I did a second 2D animation passover to really add all the finer details and clean up certain shots. All of the extra animations were done in the Blender 2D animation section called Grease Pencil. I first exported my main animation, brought it into my camera view in Grease Pencil, and then started the 2D animation right on top of that. And if I didn't directly use Grease Pencil animation, I just sculpted planes to look 2D. This stage really brought everything together for me. It got me really close to that comic book feel, with the onomatopoeia action words, highlights, flashes, and impact lines. Lastly, I exported everything out, assembled my clips in Premiere, and then I was done. The only other editing I had to do in Premiere was to adjust the saturation of my clips. Otherwise, everything else was entirely done in Blender. Now, let's talk about all the cool details I added in this animation. I may have already mentioned it, but since there are no speaking roles, I really wanted the music to do all the talking, from the vocals to the instruments, really setting the tone. I feel like the best showcase of this is when the party animal members start shooting up the scene. But instead of hearing gunshots first, you hear, I think these are drums or cymbals of some kind. I don't know, but it sounds cool. I really enjoy in movies or shows where the camera feels like another character, making it feel like it's actually part of the scene, being held by someone with quick pans, subtle camera shakes, and things of that nature. But my favorite use of this is with the change of the aspect ratio. I love when this is done, especially at the tipping point of the story. One of my favorite uses of this is done by Ryan Coogler in his film Sinners. This 3-panel shot is also another one of my favorites. I also like how Batman slightly squints his eyes in annoyance as they're shooting at him. He does this a couple more times throughout the animation. In this animation, I wanted one of the gang members to be a designated moron, and I chose a guy in the green suit, while still keeping the composition and framing the same as the comic. I thought it'd be funny if he was just on the ground looking for nothing, and then start shooting from this position. And since he was already on the ground, he's the one that gets down first. At this point, I wanted all these parts to be on beat, escalating in intensity. First starting with the stomp, then the gun hitting his head, then the tendril, and then being slammed into the building. This all goes for the kick as well. To remake this shot of the gang members running up the staircase, I didn't want to animate 20 figures doing that for a 3-second shot, so I just took one of them, duplicated their head, spread it around this area, and then added slight movements to them to simulate them all moving up at once. Here we have our designated moron scratching his head in pain and confusion from getting slammed earlier. I like to add this animation whenever I can. I just think it's funny. In this shot, we have a little bit of everyone's personality start to poke through as they get hyped to take on Batman. With a lot of my animations, I use myself as a reference for certain movements. I picked this up from watching a lot of behind the scenes of animated movies or shows who do a lot of rotoscoping or self-reference. This final shot with Batman slicing this guy's hand off is a reference to the first episode of Devilman Crybaby, and that is pretty much how I animated Absolute Batman. I had a lot of fun making this one, not having to worry about dialogue as much, and just making everything look cool. Now it won't be soon, but I do plan to animate another issue of this series. I won't say which one, but I think it will be cool. If you made it this far, thank you for watching and supporting. I really appreciate it. I really love animating and just making things in general. And hopefully, seeing how I do it can inspire you to make something. As for my next project, again, it's not like the last one I did, but here's a sneak peek.
What's up, guys? Good evening.